Welcome to IBBA InSights, providing expert advice on buying or selling small businesses. IBBA InSights is presented by the International Business Brokers Association, the world's largest nonprofit organization for those helping others sell or buy businesses. Now, here's your host, Chris Diglio.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to IBBA InSights. I hope you're all having a great day. Today, we're going to look at the sale of a business from a seller's, buyer's, and broker's perspective. What's important in the sale of a business, and why is it important? From choosing a broker, to determining if someone is truly a seller, to what's important to a seller, buyer, and broker in a SIM. We're going to answer those and many other questions over the course of the show. Our guest today is a 3-time best-selling author, business coach, and entrepreneur who's been working with business owners for the past 20 years, shedding light on the intricacies of buying, selling, and managing small and medium-sized businesses. He's the host of a YouTube channel with hundreds of videos about buying and selling businesses. It's my pleasure today to welcome to IBBA InSights, Mr. David Barnett.
Hey, Chris, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate being here, and I've actually listened to several of the podcasts, so I'm excited about this.
Today, I just want to have a nice conversation with you. Our listening audience is typically comprised of business owners, business professionals, business brokers, and advisors. So we tend to hit home on all the things that are important to them, and going through your background and your bio and what you do. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because I think you're going to shed light on a lot of the things that are important. So if it's okay, I'm just going to jump right into some of the dialogue and questions I have for you.
Yeah, sure. Let's get going. Did you want me to cover some of the background or anything for anybody listening?
Yep. What I was going to start with was just that, and wanted to know how you got into this field. You've written 7 or 8 books, I believe. 3 of them, you're the best sellers. You're working with business owners. So what got you into this field? What started you on this journey?
Just a lifelong interest in entrepreneurship, actually. And I always imagined myself being a business owner one day. And I went to business school when I got to at the end of high school. I went off to university. And in my head, I thought that going to business school was going to allow me to be a better business person. But really, what they do there is they teach you all about big business mostly. But my heart and my interest was in the world of what you and I would probably describe as Main Street businesses, the businesses that we see when we're driving around our communities, tire shops and retail stores and restaurants and catering companies and all that kind of stuff. And it was a real pleasure when I finished university to be able to go and work for the Yellow Pages. Because when I was working there, I got to go out and meet with the owners and managers of those very businesses in local cities and communities and talk with those people, find out what kind of customers they were looking for and how they made money. Eventually, with the advent of Google and the spread of the internet and the smartphone, I realized that the days of the Yellow Pages were numbered. And I thought maybe I should go and do that entrepreneur thing. And so I started a business with a partner. And after a couple of years, we sold the business. And then I briefly got into the world of brokering commercial debt for small businesses, helping people get loans, leases, that kind of thing. It eventually led me into the world of business brokerage. And I actually owned a franchise business brokerage for 3 years, sold 36 companies for other people while I did that. But as many of the people listening to this podcast are probably aware, there's an up and down to the cash flow of being a business broker. And after 3 years, I realized this isn't really working for me. And so I got into banking. And after a career in banking, people just started to reach out to me over the phone. And they were looking at doing deals, whether to buy or sell a business. And they were looking for someone to advise them. And for some reason, they were given my name. It was around this time that I wrote my first book and started the YouTube channel. But I realized that there was an opportunity for someone to just advise and consult with people that were interested in doing deals without being a broker. And so a lot of the stuff that I used to do as a broker for free in anticipation of earning a contingent commission, I had an opportunity to do for people using the business model of attorneys and accountants. So I would work with people and then give them an invoice and they would pay me. And it's grown since then. So over the past 10 years, I basically have built a consulting business where I'm helping people look at deals. And this is why I get to see a lot of SIMs put out by brokers. consult with sellers sometimes who are thinking about selling and they want to maybe bounce some ideas off of me before they go and talk with a broker. And I've also consulted with business owners who may have had their business for sale for a couple of years, maybe with a business broker, and they're looking for reasons as to why their business isn't selling. So I get to interact with a lot of these people in a lot of different ways in their own situations and try to give them some insight or point things out to them that they may not be noticing.
And I always find it intriguing talking with someone like you that works in that capacity, especially with people that are looking to sell a business or if had tried to sell a business but have failed for whatever reason. So I start off with the question to you if there's such a thing as a definition of a good seller, but who is someone that a business intermediary or a broker or someone on the coaching side looks at that's someone that would make a good seller, someone that I'd want to work with.
Yeah, I think it comes down to one word, and that would be empathy. A good seller has got to be someone who can imagine themselves in the shoes of the buyer. Because really, and you've probably come across this in your own brokerage career, if a seller comes into the field and says, "I want to sell my business, I want $1 million, and I want $1 million because I want to, I want to," right? It's entirely self-centered, completely focused on their desires and outcomes without any kind of understanding of what the buyer's point of view is going to be, how the buyer is going to maybe leverage up everything in their life to put the money together to buy this business, and how the business's cash flow ultimately has to compensate them for the risk and repay all those debts. And so when sellers are unable or unwilling to understand the deal from the point of view of the buyer, to me, it's going to make it a lot more difficult for any intermediary to make a deal happen, just because they're not going to see when things are not possible, when their expectations are completely out of line with what is even feasible from the point of view of the cash flow of the business.
Now, as sellers out there listening to you right now, and okay, so now we define what might be some of the characteristics of a good seller, their understandings of the deal, and from a buyer's perspective, walk in someone else's shoes, and you'll see where they're coming from, and you could probably put something together and make a good deal. So now they ask themselves, when is the right time to sell? What do you advise the people that you work with on the timing of the sale? Because it's different for everyone and the motivations are different for everyone. But how would you define the time to sell, the timing of a transaction?
Yeah. So it's a great question because I get asked this a lot by people who own a business. They say, when should I plan on selling or what's the right time? The five most common reasons that I hear from people who want to sell a business, I put them into five buckets. And the first bucket, I call it the mental attitude or headspace bucket. It's burnout, boredom, and fatigue. And then there's divorce, poor health, the need to relocate is another one, and then the last one is retirement. And if you look at those five reasons why people sell small businesses, four of them are actually not planned for. These are things that occur through the day-to-day of life, right? And so I'll say to a lot of business owners, I'll say, because we know that the majority of reasons why a business may go up for sale are not planned for, it means that you need to think about your business like an asset and try to get it into a state where it's ready to sell whenever it needs to be put up for sale. And so you probably hear a lot of people talking about getting systems in place and organizing things and having proper SOPs and all that kind of stuff. You want to get that stuff in order as soon as you can because your business then becomes more saleable and it means that selling is actually an option. If you suddenly are stricken with one of those things that I mentioned, and you all of a sudden need to sell your business, but it's not in a state where anyone can see how they can take it over, what you're really doing is you're not selling a business. You're trying to liquidate whatever it is that you've got in a quick fashion to whoever can make a business out of it. And what that usually means is someone who has the same skills and experience as you, but they may be younger. And so, as you can imagine, that pool of people is a lot smaller than the sort of general pool of people who are interested in buying a business. So, you get your business ready for sale whenever, as soon as possible, would be my advice. When should you be targeting it? I think that it's got to do with your life plan and what you foresee for yourself and what your life is going to look like. And I think that as people get older, those plans and the way they foresee their future are going to continuously be in flux. A lot of people will make assumptions maybe in midlife, in their late 30s, mid 40s. Oh, when I get to 65, I'm going to retire. And when they get to 65, they could still be hiking 5 miles every morning and enjoying life and feel full of energy, and they have no desire to retire. And so I've seen a lot. I don't know about you, Cress, but many business owners who get their systems and procedures in place and they're able to get some good supervisory and mid-level management staff in place, they can really dial back the number of hours that they work in the business and they can continue owning it in a really pleasant way through their 60s into their 70s. And so these plans are always going to change. You have to deal with life. Uh, because businesses sell for a relatively low multiple of cash flow, I don't think that cashing out or the sale of the business is really where the gravy is in ownership. The gravy in owning a small business is the operation, is collecting those profits every year, right? The idea that there should be some kind of timing the market to exit at a peak. I think that relates more to like big companies or the stock market or things like that. Yeah, I don't know if I've given you the answer that you're looking for, but
Yeah, I think you're giving me the answer that to the question. It was a honest answer. I look at it sometimes in talking to my clients and people I work with, or just in general, other brokers that ask me questions along the way. And they say, when is the right time for someone to sell? I said, it just really depends on the individual and their plan.
yeah,
Business owners have different viewpoints of what their goals are with their business. Some are to buy it, build it, start it, build it, grow it, sell it, and make a nice return. Others look at it as this is my life, this is my livelihood, it's what takes care of my family, and I'm going to have it till the day I die or the day I retire or pass it off to a family member. I think the understanding of why you're in your business and what your goals are, but as you said, be ready to veer off of that path because unfortunately, more times than not, the reason for sale is not a positive reason. It's
yeah.
a have to, not a want to. And so being ready to be able to sell is the most important thing. And I love the way you said that earlier. And I like to say, when someone asks, when should I prepare for selling my business? I'm like, the day you start your business. And that's being facetious. But if you think about it, your business should always be ready for the sale just in case life happens.
Yeah. Yeah, to your point about when you should get ready to sell, I used to say that too, get ready to sell it when you started. But after a little bit of reflection, I came up with this different answer. I said, you should really be serious about getting your business ready for sale when you reach the point where your business is able to pay you a fair market wage for the work that you're doing every day. And then there's profit beyond that. Because that really indicates that you own something that is more than just owning a job, that you have something of a real economic value that someone's probably going to want to pay money for.
And that's absolutely right. It's important to be able to look at it that way. Again, you run into those situations where I think you said the four or the five, where it's, oh, geez, wasn't planning on it, wasn't wanting to possibly sell today, but it looks like today might have to be that day. Be ready, be prepared. But like you said, yes, get the business to a point where it's at a level where, you know, it could sustain you. And it's not, you're right, it's not a job. You're making profits over and above and beyond the work that you're putting into it. And I really liked what you said earlier about options. Business owners
Mm,
sometimes don't realize they have options. There's an option of scaling back. There's an option of putting management or layers of management in place. And sometimes someone will say, but if I do that, I'm not going to make as much money. You're going to buy yourself some time and you'd be surprised you might make more money because now you're going to focus on other aspects of the business while other people are taking care of maybe the day-to-day or the operational points of the business. But you also make that business more attractive when you go to sell because when
mhm.
you're opening your pool of buyers, now it's an investor one day may be able to purchase your business because they're not buying, like you said, a job. They're buying an investment, an opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of small business people, when they get into business, in my experience anyway, a lot of small business owners tend to be amongst perfectionist type people where they have a certain way of doing things and they think this is the best way to do it. And many times, if they need to start bringing staff in, they'll delegate tasks to the staff, but they don't necessarily delegate responsibilities to the staff. And this is where the big difference between small business and big business. If you go into a big business, there are people that are charged with certain areas of responsibility, and they come up with their own ways of doing things, and as long as things are managed. And it can be a big eye-opening experience for a lot of small business owners to start hiring people and assigning them responsibility over certain things and seeing how those people come up with new and different ways to do things, which often may be better, more efficient than what the business owner thought. And so when you start to bring more human resources into a business, more human capital, you get all of the ingenuity and inventiveness and resourcefulness of those people as well, as long as you hire the right people. If you hear people that are speakers in a big business space, they'll talk about this kind of thing, how having the right people and the right culture, et cetera, is going to help these businesses grow and be more innovative. Same thing can happen in small business, except a lot of small business owners won't let it happen because they feel that they're the only ones that can do it right. And so I often challenge people on that very idea.
We talked about timing, what makes a good seller, what is the right time to sell, and the different layers of business or the options that are out there. But now's the day. I'm a business owner. I'm going to sell my business. Now I have to hire someone to assist me in that process. And if I go that route, what are some of the most important factors a business owner should consider when choosing a broker or an advisor in the transaction?
This is a great question. One of the books that I wrote a few years ago was actually called How to Sell My Own Business. And on the surface, it looks like it's a book about how to sell your own business on your own. But the first part of the book is actually about why you might not want to and how you actually choose a qualified business broker. And when I talk about business brokers in my videos online, I'm always sure or certain to add that keyword because as a lot of people listening will know, there's a lot of people out in this space calling themselves business brokers who may not have really much in the way of particular training or expertise or experience in actually doing these transactions, but they're out there marketing themselves as the one who can help a business owner get the highest price, for example. And so for business owners, let's get back to that E word I used, empathy. Think of yourself in the shoes of a buyer. What I would be doing if I was out there interviewing business brokers is I would be asking business brokers to provide me with examples of their work. What does that mean? Copies of business profiles or information memorandums that have been made anonymous. Show me some of the SIMs that you've used in your successful transactions. I want to look at them and see what the buyer saw, and I want to see how you represented that other business. You want to ask them about the number of businesses that they've sold, the types of businesses that they've sold. You want to make sure that there is some commonality between your business and the broker's experience. So, for example, one of the common things that I see absent in most business profiles or SIMs is any kind of conversation or understanding around working capital. And so it's important because if a buyer is buying a business and the seller thinks it's in an asset sale, for example, that they're going to keep all the receivables and all the cash, that means that the buyer's got to make a further investment in their own business entity to make the business work. If the SIM disregards that altogether and the broker doesn't bring up this conversation or allow the seller to understand that if there's operating capital not included, that the buyer has to make a further investment, this is going to inflate the expectations on the part of the seller. They may believe that their business is worth more than it really is because they're not making this operating capital adjustment in their head. More so, the broker should be preparing the seller with an understanding of the operating capital requirements, and there should be a conversation about it in the SIM or the business profile. When businesses are presented, for example, in a share sale, there'll often be a conversation about working capital requirements and the proper capitalization of the business. In asset sales, it's usually absent. And so this is one of the examples of where a more experienced intermediary is going to be a lot more useful to a seller than someone who maybe hasn't sold a business with as great an operating capital requirement. And so you want to look for examples of similar kinds of businesses that the intermediary has sold before, and just the fact that they have done it and they're experienced. I speak with a lot of people who are thinking about a career in business brokerage. And for a lot of people that get into brokerage, they'll start up and maybe they'll work for months and months or a year before they get their first clients and close their first deals. A lot of people just can't afford it. So there's a big turnover in the industry. And if you're dealing with someone who may be newer to the industry, what does their support framework look like? Are they in an office with other experienced people that are going to be helping them out with the file? Or are they standalone? Are they a member of something like the IBBA where they can have access to resources, training, et cetera? One of the things I point out in my book in thinking about a business broker is to look for evidence that this person is investing in their own knowledge and professional skill.
Yeah.
Because again, how many members are there in the IBBA, Chris?
I think we're approaching 3,000 members now. I know we're over 2,000. It's at an
Okay.
all-time high. Just continues to grow.
And what fraction of the industry do you think that represents?
Oh, unfortunately, a small fraction
Yeah.
of the industry, because in business brokerage, you could be in a licensing state like the state of Florida. If you have a real estate license, you are deemed to be able to sell businesses. And there are people out there that call themselves a business broker because they have a real estate license. So a
Mhm.
very small percentage, I would say, it represents.
And that's exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about. The way that someone with a real estate background might put together a document to represent a business opportunity is going to be very different from someone who's gone through some of the training that an organization like IBBA would offer. And it's very clear when a buyer looks at this information, especially when they get help from someone like me, we start to go through the sim and just the list of questions that are raised, like just all of these unknowns start to come up because of the lack of what's being discussed in the sim. Now, I remember when I had my initial training as a business broker, and this over a dozen years ago, the standard of care that I heard the instructor tell me was this document should be so complete that somebody would feel confident making a conditional offer based on the information in the document. So you're going to explain the cash flow, you're going to explain all the different aspects about inventory and capex and what equipment is in the business and what that stuff might be worth and what the inventory needs are and terms from suppliers and all that kind of stuff so that the person really understands what the business is, what the business model is, how the business functions, how it makes money, and can see the numbers and can say, you know what, subject to due diligence, of course, this is what I'm willing to pay for this business. And so many of these documents don't come anywhere close to that standard.
I have a lot of questions about the sim that I want to go into, but just to go
Sure.
backwards, just real quick, we talked about some of the things a business owner would consider when choosing a broker. And I love the show me what you got, but you have to understand from a seller's point of view, it's great when someone tells you, I sold 20 businesses last year. That's phenomenal, right? It's kind of half the story though. How many
Mhm.
businesses did you list? Because if you listed 30 and sold 20, that's phenomenal. But if you listed 150 and sold 20, that's not so great. So it's not, sometimes you have to go a little deeper into the questions that you're asking, because sometimes, and this is not typical of an IBBA member, but in a typical business broker who's not investing in themselves and working on educating the client and doing all the professional things that they should do in representing a business, sometimes they're just order takers. How much you want for that
Mm.
business? Great. You put enough things up against the wall, you just see what sticks, and you could luck your way into selling quite a few businesses. But that doesn't necessarily, I think, make you part of the upper echelon. I'd rather hire someone that sold 10 businesses last year out of the 15 that they listed. Their success rate is high, and that's what I'm after. And the importance of the product that they're putting out. You'll hear, and I think you'll like this. There's some brokers out there when they talk about a sim, they say, "Oh, you don't need a sim. If it's a good business, it's going to sell no matter how good or bad the sim is. There's nothing you're going to say in that sim that's going to sell the business. It's the business that's ultimately going to sell itself. So why bother?" What do you say to that person that tells a business owner that, or the business owner that's just received that information from someone, that it just doesn't matter?
Yeah, what I would say there's an ideal buyer out there and there's a less than ideal buyer. And part of the SIM's job is not just to sell the business, it's also to weed out the people who are not ideal buyers. And you want a document that's going to help filter in both directions so that the people who have the right kind of background, skills, and resources are the ones who are actually stepping forward to fill up your time. I would say that if there was no SIM, and believe me, I've seen this, where brokers will have a one-page cover and it comes with a bunch of internal P&Ls that have little scribbles beside add back notes. And you get that document through and you're like, wow, what are we going to do with this? I actually say to some of my buyers, this could be an opportunity because reasonable people that have resources are going to look at this and say, wow, this seller's got no idea what they're doing. They're completely unprepared. I encourage my buyers, say, hey, there's probably not going to be as much interest from people who you might normally compete with here. Maybe we can get a better deal. Maybe we can get better terms. We can get more seller financing, et cetera. Because a real strong, capable, qualified buyer is probably going to be put off by this. And unfortunately for that seller, they're not going to meet the person that's probably going to be willing to put the best offer forward.
Probably not. And when you're representing a buyer, as you do, you're at an advantage over the seller if they're not represented by the same quality of individual, because the buy side individual is going to look at this as an opportunity. They're going to say, they clearly just listed this business at a price that they wanted and not what the business
Mhm.
will actually sell for. So now when we go back and negotiate on your behalf, we're going to use the statistics. We're going to use industry standards. We're going to go back and say, I understand you're asking $1 million for this business, and my buyer really likes your business and thinks it's a great business and wants to pay you a premium for a good business and reward you for the great work that you've done. And in this offer we put together, we'd be able to do that. And then all of a sudden you come in with a $750,000 offer, but you explain and say, look, based on the multiple of businesses in your industry, your size, this business is worth anywhere between 675 and $725,000. So our offer of $750,000 is actually above the industry average. So now you're trying to soften the blow, but with factual information. It's, yes, I know you're asking $1 million, but I'm not lowballing you at this 750. I'm actually paying you greater or on the high end of what it's worth. So yeah, on the buy side, it certainly gives you all sorts of opportunity when you're representing the buyer.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that sometimes happens, of course, is when you have a less experienced intermediary that's accepting listings and putting whatever asking price the seller wants, is that when you come back with one of those very coherent offers, and I've actually been part of some offers that included cash flow projections.
Mhm.
One of the things that sellers often don't empathize about is most sellers don't have a big loan, and a lot of buyers are going to put a lot of leverage on the deal. So they're going to have a big bank loan that needs to be serviced. And so the seller, from their point of view, they see all the cash flow they enjoy from the business. But from the buyer's point of view, it's not quite such a gravy train because they've got that big bank payment to make. And so we've shown sellers, here's the industry averages of what this business will sell for. Now here's the cash flow forecast for the buyer, demonstrating what their position is going to be in with the loan that they're going to take. And the seller will look at it all and then say, wow, I can see now why this is a good offer. But here's the problem. They can't afford to retire on that offer.
Right.
And so they end up backing away saying, I can't take the offer, even though I understand it's good now. And what has happened? Well, the seller just wasted their time. The intermediary just wasted their time. The buyer just wasted their time. And this is one of the big reasons why, if you own a business and you're going to look at selling it, you need to make sure that you're working with someone who's a qualified, competent person who's going to actually show you realistically what the business value is and what maybe the terms are likely going to be, what a reasonable offer could be. What some of the saddest conversations I have with sellers is they'll approach me and say, "Hey, I've been trying to sell this business for the last 2 years. Can you maybe help me out?" And they'll send me a package that an intermediary has put together for them. And I'll look at the package and I'll do just what you explained. I'll pull up some comps and I'll show them why their business is actually worth a lot less. And furthermore, why a cash offer maybe isn't reasonable, that they should be expecting an offer that might have 30 or 40% seller financing based on the condition of the business or other characteristics. And one of the saddest things that someone said to me once was, wow, someone offered that to me 4 months into my sale process, and I didn't take the offer because I didn't understand that was reasonable. And so this person had the opportunity to exit, but their intermediary didn't prepare them properly. They didn't have a realistic understanding of what their business's value was. And this person wanted to exit because they had a spouse with a chronic illness. They wanted to spend their time with that other person. And so this kind of thing, we're talking about largely in the Main Street space, owner operators. And so these people are working full time in their business. And we mentioned the top reasons why people sell a business, and four of them were unplanned for. And they're all personal, all five of them are personally driven by things going on in the life of the business owner. And oftentimes, when a decision comes to sell the business, it's because staying and operating the business is not an option for some reason in that person's life. They need to now move on to something else. And I say to sellers all the time, when you make the decision, I need to sell or I have to sell now because of whatever reason, it's now almost a race against the clock because those personal factors, even though people try not to let this happen, those personal factors are going to have an influence on that individual's day to day. And that's going to bear out in how they interact with employees, customers, et cetera. And those personal factors are going to start to have an impact on the business. Sales are going to start to slip. Maybe they'll become less efficient. So margins will slip, profits will go down. And as soon as you move far enough into the future, that slippage starts to be recorded in the financial statements. Now you've got a downward trend. And as soon as you have a downward trend, a whole swath of buyers are not going to want to do the deal because they're going to see this as a red flag. And so when the decision is made to sell, you need to act quickly. You need to understand what a reasonable deal looks like, and you need to get it in front of the right buyers so that you can make your deal before these personal life impacts start to have an impact on the business. Businesses are fragile. I always point out to people that what a business truly is a system. It's a bunch of people that show up every day and they do their thing with the tools and the machines and the inventory and all that kind of stuff. And they operate together in a certain fashion that produces a cash flow. And a system is extremely fragile. People stop doing exactly the things they're supposed to do, and you start to have errors and delays, et cetera. The whole thing can fall apart relatively quickly.
David, the role of a business broker is not to tell the business owner what they want to hear. It's to tell them the truth because they may have a real need in selling now. And if you inflate their expectations by telling them what you think they want to hear, you're doing them a disservice. It's like when I went to the doctor when I was 19 years old, I didn't want to hear him tell me that I had cancer. I wanted him to tell me I was fine. Well, if he would have told me I was fine, you and I wouldn't be doing this interview today because he would have been lying to me. But because I knew and I was able to then have surgery and go through that 30 plus years later, I'm still here and I'm well and cancer free. It's the same thing with a business, maybe not to that extreme. A business, it can be that extreme because a business is the thing that takes care of everything in your life, your finances, your family, schooling, trips, mortgages, cars. I mean, it's important. And when a business fails, that could be the failure of a lot of things. It could lead to health issues and stress. It could lead to failure in a marriage and families falling apart. When you look at all that's at stake, you tend to look at representing a business owner that's selling their business in a whole different way. You have to be upfront. You have to be honest, and you have to let them know, and you have to educate them on what to expect and when to expect and why to expect and prepare them for what's to come. Because if you don't, you're doing them a disservice. So if you're out there and you're looking to sell and you're looking to hire someone to represent you, don't go with who's telling you what you want to hear. Go with who's telling you what you need to hear, because that ultimately is going to be the difference between selling and maybe not selling your business in a timely manner.
But it's interesting because a lot of the marketing material out there that business brokers might use to try to attract business owners that want to sell One of the common themes that I see over and over again in this marketing material is we help you sell your business for the highest possible price. And for people that are motivated by avarice and greed and wanting that, like you could be attracting, if you're a broker using those messages, you could be attracting just the wrong kind of customers. Instead, you said, we sell 60% of the businesses we list, and we sell half of them within 6 months of going to market. That tells a very different message, doesn't it? It says we are qualified, we know what we're doing, we are yielding results, and for the vast majority of our clients, we're yielding them in a very timely fashion. And that's going to bring you a different kind of customer, someone who is more time oriented. I've got to, because of these pressing personal concerns, I've got to exit this business over the course of the next year, for example. And that person is going to be, let's face it, as a business broker, most business brokers are paid a contingent fee upon the sale of the business. If you get sellers that are oriented in that direction towards making deals happen quickly, it means that the payday of the broker is going to happen more quickly too. So there's an alignment of everyone's interests with that kind of marketing message versus the I sell your business for top dollar kind of message.
Right. And so we go back to the sim and we're talking about the marketing materials and that's put together. Ultimately, a buyer is looking at this sim. So what, from a seller's perspective, what is important to that buyer? What are they looking for in the sim? Because if you just put out a book that says, I'm the best, we're the greatest, you should buy us. What is important? What information should there be in the sim besides factual information, obviously?
Number one, understanding the business model. In a lot of information about what are the norms in this industry. So if you're doing a product or service and maybe the customer doesn't pay you, maybe it's insurance companies pay, have some conversation about that. Explain to people, we do body work. A certain percentage of our clients are paying through insurance claims, and this is how long it takes insurance claims companies to pay us, right? So you're explaining how this business functions and what to expect in this business, certifications, licenses, what kinds of skills the owner uses every day. So to say that the business is run by its owner who manages the business day to day, that may seem very obvious to a person who's already in the industry what that owner is doing. But for a person who isn't in the industry, what are the daily chores and tasks of the owner and what sort of skills are they using? Are they dealing with the public every day? Are they dealing with suppliers? Are they making purchasing decisions? Are they acting in a sales function with the major customers, right? So you're describing what the day of the owner looks like. You're describing the types of skills and characteristics that the new owner may want to have if they're going to step into that person's role and run the business in a similar fashion. You want to have information I mentioned earlier about operating capital. You want to talk about things like inventory. When I see a set of balance sheets in a sim, let's say for 3 years, and the inventory is the exact same number every year, it immediately tells me that nobody's counting the inventory, right? And so, as a broker, if you face that situation, you should realize, hey, if anyone with any degree of business acumen looks at this, they're going to see that you do not count the inventory every year. This is going to open a whole bunch of questions. It should be addressed in the sim. So there should be some kind of conversation about what the normal inventory levels are, what the normal cost of goods should be, because if the inventory is not right, the cost of goods aren't right. And so you want to be in front of the questions as much as possible. Again, and as a business broker, when you're preparing one of these sims, you may even want to run one past someone who's not familiar with the file. Could you sit down and read this and tell me what you think? What would your questions be, et cetera? And some of the more interesting things that I'm seeing lately are brokers who are interviewing sellers and recording it and then making this recording available, almost an automation of that initial buyer seller meeting. Like an interview like you and I are doing right now, just a conversation where
Yep.
the seller will talk about the business and the history of the business and all that kind of stuff. And it can really help to lay the foundation for what will eventually, hopefully, become a great relationship between the buyer and the seller. One of the big red flags for me when I'm helping a buyer is when brokers will not allow any access to the seller. when they say, no, you can't talk with the seller, or no, we don't want you to come by here and meet with the seller and see the business. To me, that's somebody, the intermediary is someone maybe with a real estate background who has this concern that if the buyer and seller meet each other, that they're going to somehow work around his commission or something like that. But in order for a business to be sold, there has to be a relationship that is trustworthy established between the buyer and the seller, because the buyer is always going to close this deal with some unknown information, and the seller is always in a position of total knowledge and power. But if there's any degree of seller financing, the seller needs the buyer to be successful in order to collect all the money. So both of them are in a position where they're relying upon the other party to a certain degree. And so the only way the deal is going to get done is with a trusting relationship being established. And so that's the other thing that a broker needs to think about when creating the sim is everything in here. Does it lead us on the path towards a trusting relationship? Or am I omitting things or putting things in here when they are discovered to be inaccurate or absent that is going to open the door to questions about the trustworthiness of the seller? Right? If there's something really important about the business that is absent from the sim, and then the buyer later finds out, the assumption is simply going to be that there's a whole bunch of other stuff too that was never disclosed. And that does not allow a trusting relationship to be established. That bond that I often say that a successful business sale transaction results in the buyer and seller becoming friends. And back in my own broker days, there were plenty of deals that I did where the seller years after the deal would still be stopping in with coffee and stuff like that to talk shop and see how things were going. And they would still be excited about the success that the new buyer had with the business. And that's my opinion. That's what I've seen be successful. And I know that some people are a little more transactional about things. And maybe you can be in certain markets if you're selling convenience stores or gas stations, which have a lot of similarity one to the next. But if there's going to be any degree of serious transition or seller financing or real skills that need to be transferred from the seller to the buyer, without trust, I don't think the deals can happen.
And I think you were dead on accurate earlier in the show when you commented and said, being able to get someone comfortable enough with enough information that they feel that they could put forward a legitimate or a good offer, whether it be an LOI, an IOI, enough information to get them to feel comfortable to put something in writing that will ultimately be put before you as the business owner that you can look at. Because you're right, you could have a lot of information in a sim and you could hide a lot of things. And if your goal is to fool somebody, you may just do that. But more often than not, and probably greater than 90% of the time, as the saying goes, it all comes out in the wash. So you're better off
Mm.
getting ahead of it and talking about it, because then if you get ahead of it and you talk about it, then when you get the offer is reflective of that information and you didn't have to hide it and you're not going to have to renegotiate as you go on. But I've got one more thing I want to talk about when it comes to Sims. And this is a very controversial subject and people don't like to necessarily talk about this, but I do. There are some companies out there that I feel don't sell businesses, they sell books. They spend tons of money with elaborate presentations, impressive resumes of their team, and create false expectations by promising some inflated value of the business in order to collect $40,000 to $100,000 in upfront fees. Now, business owners sometimes are happy to pay these fees because they have the feeling that, man, if you could get me that much money for my business, it's worth the investment. And I'm not saying these companies never sell businesses, but I'm saying they're in the business of selling fancy books. And on occasion, they might sell a business and their percentages are going to be much lower than someone that's actually in the business of selling a business. So how do business owners avoid falling into the trap of spending a lot of money only to find out to get their dreams and hopes crushed when they get inferior results or no results at all?
Yeah, it's funny because I've actually made a video years ago about scams, business brokerage scams, and spend your time educating yourself. Because if there's a business broker who says, I have some kind of initiation or engagement fee and it's $2,500, Well, that's typically a hurdle to make sure that as a business owner, you are serious about selling your business.
Yes.
And there's a certain amount of work that goes into the upfront preparation of the business being sold. And so if you have a business with $1 million in sales and you're making a couple hundred grand a year, for example, for a business broker to ask you for a $2,500 initiation fee, it's probably a legitimate kind of fee where they're testing to make sure that you're serious about selling your business and
Sure.
creating a little bit of
It's
cash flow, but creating a little bit of for the broker as well.
You
But
got to figure skin in the game. Some people
yeah,
are just out there that want to test the market. Let me see, man, if I could get my number. But the person that's willing to write you the check, even if it's for a nominal amount, they're probably more serious about selling their business than not. But that's
right.
not the
And
that's
and
different
so
than
and
that's
so
different than those books.
right. And so here's where I want to get to that is if you are a business of a significant size where you're going to be dealing with these larger mid-market M&A firms, they may be asking you for 25 to $40,000 to prepare and set up the deal. And
Sure.
so here's what you do is you turn to your CFO and ask them their opinion of the firm and the firm's track record and the fee. And if you say, David, I'm not big enough to have a CFO, that probably means you're not big enough to deal with a firm that might have that kind of legitimate fee. And so somebody who's coming down market into Main Street asking for these kinds of fees, I would just be very hesitant about it because I've been around this space since 2008, and I've heard stories from the older guys of companies coming into towns and getting all the business owners together at an airport hotel for an extravagant presentation about how they're going to sell their business, and they charge them all 25 grand, and nobody ever hears from them again. And yeah, there's a danger in this, and I know what you're saying. I don't think an engagement fee, if it's a reasonable fee, is necessarily a red flag. But if it seems really high, then shop around, talk to some other people. And increasingly, what I'm seeing is it's something that the UK has had for a long time over there. Because their country is so small geographically, they tend to have brokers that are industry focused, right? Where they only sell one kind of business, but they sell it all over the country. And I'm starting to see more and more of this in the United States and Canada, where brokers, because of the internet and Zoom and all these other technologies that we have, they're becoming more industry focused and they're covering larger geographies,
Mhm.
but they're sticking within that narrow industry. And regardless of where you are or the kind of business you have, if you spend 10 minutes Googling, you're going to find multiple firms out there that are probably going to be one that could serve you. So just have those conversations and see what those different firms are doing and what they're saying. And hey, you wouldn't be successful in business if you didn't have a little bit of insight and be able to listen to your gut on some things and suss people out who may not be treating you fairly.
And I'm in no way implying or saying that you should run from a firm that wants to charge some sort of upfront fees because do believe it becomes customary, especially on the larger the business. But I was alluding to exactly what you said about that group that, back in the day that would come to town and in the in their expensive suits and impressive brochures and at an airport location near you, and they were in the business of selling books. And they did. I've talked to people that sold their business through that process. So it's not that they never sell anything, but their percentages are so poor, but they feed off of people's greed.
Mhm.
Wow. I talked to a broker and they told me they could only get me 3 times or 3.5 times. And you're telling me I could get 7 times. And you must be right because look at you. You went to Harvard and look at this great book and presentation you're putting out there. And look at all these people that are in this room. That's what I'm just saying. And again, I'm not even saying that there aren't companies that do that out there that are legitimate, but I am saying it's buyer beware. And I love, again, going back to what you said earlier, to the interview process, asking the right questions, not falling in love with the idea of what someone could get from me or what they're telling me they can get from me. What have they actually done? So,
Mm.
David, I could talk to you for another 3 hours and we could have many episodes of this podcast, but we're coming to the end. So, this is the part of the show that I always ask a very similar question to our guest based on the topic. So, if you're a seller out there and they're listening to this show and our interview, and maybe even a business intermediary, a business broker that are out there listening, from each of their perspectives, what advice would you give them when it comes to the ultimate sale and marketing of their business and choosing the right company and making sure the next step they're making, because they only have one shot at getting it right, is the right choice?
Yeah, so I would say from the owner of the business's point of view is understand your cash flow. And when you meet with someone to talk about the value of your business, they're going to start talking about things like add backs and EBITDA and STE and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, sit down and imagine yourself buying the business and imagine yourself borrowing money. And with the help of a loan calculator online, you can find out what those debt service payments will be. And just ask yourself, would I buy this business with this cash flow and then go work in it and have to pay this debt? Would this amount of money that is here be sufficient for me? Would it make sense given the risks of small business? And really put yourself in the mind of the buyer and see if it makes sense. And for the brokers out there, I would say that you want to develop as part of your presentation an exercise in empathy. You want to take sellers through this exercise to help them see what their business is going to look like from a buyer's point of view. And if they steadfastly hold to that round figure, whether it's 1 million, 5 million, or whatever it is, then I think it's just a little bit of an insight about what it may be like to deal with them when you actually have a reasonable offer on the table, that they may not be the seller who's actually going to accept the reasonable offer. And at the end of the day, a broker's job is to make deals happen, and that's how brokers get paid. And so there's two sides to it. I once said to a business broker, think about your business like any other kind of business.
Right.
You've got a supplier and you've got a customer. Well, if you can't reasonably obtain your inventory at a reasonable price that your customers are willing to pay for you to make a profit, then it's not going to work. You need to find a different supplier. And the business sellers are the supplier of a business broker's inventory. And so look at it like a supplier relationship. You need to find the suppliers that are going to be reasonably priced and have reasonable expectations so that you are going to be able to move that inventory and have a buyer be happy as well about the transaction that they're doing.
David, before I let you go and get back to your work and your busy day, I want to thank you for sharing all of these insights with our audience and all the tidbits of information and the great advice that you've shared. So if someone's out there listening and they said, you know what, I'd really like to learn more about what David does, how can they find out more about your services?
Yeah, sure. davidcbarnett.com is my blog site. It's like the central place where they can learn about my books, my online courses. They can see my blog posts with videos. But if you go on YouTube or any of the podcasting apps for audio and just search David Barnett Small Business, I'll come right up. And I've been creating content for years, almost 10 years now. And so there's lots of stuff there. And it's all for free for people to enjoy. And I welcome people to come and listen and search through it. I've had a lot of fun creating it, and it's all been created mostly based on questions and feedback that I've gotten from people out there who are just like your listeners.
David, thank you very much again. I truly appreciate you coming on and sharing everything with our audience today. Thanks again.
Thanks, Chris. It was great.
If you're out there and you enjoyed today's show and you'd like to hear other episodes of IBBA Insights, I invite you to go to ibba.org/insights, where you could subscribe to the podcast by clicking the Apple, Android, or email icons. And as we always say, then you'll never have to miss another episode again. So thanks again for listening. I look forward to talking with you again on the next episode of IBBA Insights.